Hello, welcome to Voice of Super. I'm Mary Delahunty, the CEO of ASFA, bringing you the only podcast for the super industry by the super industry. A hot topic today. Earlier this year, our sector saw attempts by cyber criminals to access member accounts of a number of funds. While the overwhelming majority of the attempts were stopped, accounts were breached. It's fair to say it was a big moment for the super sector and a moment we are learning from and working hard to avoid ever happening again. We'll get to some of those actions in a minute. Firstly, let's bring in a key player in Australia's superannuation sector. MUFG Pension and Market Services, or MPMS, was closely involved in responding to the incident. And today, I'm really pleased to welcome the Head of Financial Crime, Eoin Burke. Eoin, welcome to Voice of Super. Let's start off with some background basics. What does MPMS do for super funds in Australia, and for how many people are you looking after their super funds?
Perfect. Thanks, Mary. Thank you for having me on. MPMS provides end-to-end administrative services to a number of superannuation funds, spanning across around 10 million member accounts. Those services cover contact centres, web portals, benefit and claim processing, all the way through to cyber and financial crimes units, which support the funds in protecting member accounts.
And for listeners who don't know a bit of my checkered history of work, this is how I first came across the superannuation sector, actually, by working in the administrator, as it was previously known. So I've got a bit of a history here as well, and I can only imagine how the incident unfolded in your organisation. Eoin, talk us through, what was it like from your perspective? What were the warning signs that something was going on, and what did you do when that became clear?
Yeah, it would have been in late March. We would have seen increased traffic on member portals. And as we started to look at what was the attack vector like, we obviously established that it was attempted credential stuffing. So credential stuffing is ultimately threat actors utilising information that they've either garnered from the dark web or other data breaches, so username and password, and then attempting to log into member portals to commit unauthorised transactions. And what we really started to see across those portals was bots and scripts being utilised to attempt to log in at scale, and our portal response. So in terms of the actual incident itself, as we saw that traffic increase, we obviously spoke to funds. Our incident response plan was enacted, led by the CISO, the technology director, and myself, as we started to step through what was the traffic that we were seeing, how do we continue to mitigate that, how do we work with funds to analyse the behaviour and make sure that we're repelling those attacks from the threat actors.
I think that's important probably to just underscore that this wasn't a breach of data from super out, was it? It was a breach that has been used from some other time, a number of times, I suppose, trying to use that to get from out there into super, yeah?
Absolutely. And, in terms of the credentials that might have been used, broadly, people would utilize the same username and password, or email address and password across multiple different organizations or login kind of processes. So that information, though it didn't relate to the actual superannuation account in certain instances, they were able to utilize that because the password is the same across multiple accounts. So they were trying to recycle those. And
as this is a safe space, I think it's probably only fair that I admit I am one of those people. I have I know I don't even, Head of Financial Crime, I'm telling this to you, Eoin, in confidence, right? That I've now changed, obviously, passwords and made sure the household has done the same, but it really was quite eye-opening. So let's go on to other sectors. Can you contextualise this for us? Because a lot of us hear about cyber incidents. We can think about whether they're, we might get mixed up about whether their data breach is out, etc. But literally every single industry, especially those within financial services, is targeted by cyber criminals. And so super is a target, obviously. What can you see in other sectors, and how can you contextualise this for us?
Yeah, the attack surface across, cyber and financial crimes is consistent across, financial services. If we take MUFG, MPMS alone. We deal with around 2 million distinct cybersecurity attacks every year, and actively, monitor and control that activity from a financial crimes perspective. What does that look like? Since January to present, we've identified and protected around 24 million in member funds that we've protected because they're at higher risk of potential compromise or risk activity. So, the super sector is very similar to the broader financial crimes and cybersecurity landscape. There's multiple attacks. There's variations of the attack. They're utilizing dark web information, credential purchasing, bots and scripts, and now starting to see, AI be deployed to create fake IDs or other documents to try and bypass controls across the sector.
Yeah, and we deal a lot, obviously, you would too, I imagine, in your community on with the banking sector, and have a lot of, sort of friends in the sector where we can draw upon their knowledge and understanding. We really haven't seen the same level of threats in super as we have in banking. Banking must be dealing with this sort of thing all the time. Would that be your understanding as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I attend the National Anti-Scam Centre meetings, and it really gives myself a really good understanding of what's happening across multiple sectors, whether it's banks, telcos, insurance, and other payment processes. So these are not new kind of challenges that are being faced into, but I do think the National Anti-Scam Centre and some of those information sharing or thematic sharing has been really positive for the financial services industry to identify and respond to those changing risks. But yeah, it's a problem that's been experienced across the market, and in super it's probably started to build up over time, that risk profile.
Yeah. And I think, we talk about obviously what's been lost here. Have you got a figure on what's been protected?
Yeah, well, from that, from a MPMS perspective, that Jan to present day is 24 million in that kind of risk activity that we've identified and managed to mitigate through multiple layers of controls, analytics, and intel. And it is really an ongoing fight. We're continuing to try and mature and how we identify those risks. How do we deal with other organizations to try and respond to those risks and share those threats more broadly? So it's definitely an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, that gives you pause, doesn't it? That 24 million is an enormous figure and quite a successful story, really. The thing that we've been sort of thinking about at ASFA is just if you kind of looked at the super sector like it's an organisation, you have to do a risk register for it, that the risks in super are really quite different from banking and other financial services, although the method that people might use to get into it are the same. But we're thinking about, well, the risk register looks a little bit like people's money is at greater risk when a condition of release has already been met. And super's got some sort of natural protections around it as well, doesn't it? In that it's supposed to stay in the system. How do you think about that sort of risk framing?
Yeah, absolutely. I would have come from a banking sector out of Europe and a little bit here in Australia, and I think the cadence and the size of transactions are slightly different. So the cadence of attacks in super, given that there's the preservation process and kind of conditions of release, when an account is created, that might not be the exact attack time that it takes place. But as we get into phases where an account is more multi-transactional, that's obviously where the risk increases significantly. So it may not be multiple small transactions in certain instances. It may be a one-off attack on a large amount of funds. But what that helps us do is really focus on that protection cycle, because for a member, from a member's perspective, and I think we need to keep it front of mind, this could be one of their largest transactions that they'll ever make, and it is obviously a representation of their working life and retirement. So we need to really put in the controls and focus on that to make sure it's safe. And what we talk about is safety at speed. How do we provide a service in a safe manner, but how do we get that at speed where we can supply the funds to an individual who needs it? But yeah, the risk profile and cycle is very different in super than other financial services.
And we have seen, I think, over time, anyone who's, as I do quite often, probably more often than I should, buying shoes, from international websites, that the transactions for banking really slows down. Like, they've introduced a fair bit of friction to take a safety first kind of approach. I think that's, what do you think, Owen? I think that's one of the things that super needs to face into as well. We've really had speed as a paramount objective in some of our transactions, but maybe that's not, that needs to be considered alongside other factors.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always an element of friction, or if we look at what is the control landscape across super, I think there's an opportunity, and even off the back of the cyber event, to learn from what that control maturity looks like. So whether it's looking at opportunities to have different ID verification processes, different MFA and step up processes, so you can work your way through those controls, but in a safe manner, and still manage to transact in the right kind of cadence for a member. So there, we talk about controls and sometimes friction, but sometimes they can also be a supporter of a digital channel where you can make a payment in a secure manner quickly. So I think there's a trade-off from controls, both positive and maybe a little bit of friction as well.
Yeah. Well, we've all been sort of wondering what the lessons are and how we make sure that we're continuing to strengthen things as we move forward from this particular episode. What are the ones that are most top of mind for MPMS?
I think industry collaboration, I think, is incredibly important. Having that, whether it's a CISO or financial crimes community who can come together, and maybe not be sharing at the exact data level, but it's certainly thematics. What are you experiencing? What are you seeing on your portals? Is there something I need to be aware of? I think that's incredibly important. I think just simply from a control perspective, MFA and how it was deployed was a really strong control. I think in any event like this, there's an opportunity as well to look at, organizations to look at what is their control pattern. Can I step it up? Can I use new technology to both protect the member, but also make sure we're making the payment in the right direction to the right individual account? So I think definitely collaboration is really key. And we see that working across, other industries, whether it's the Australian Financial Crimes Exchange. It's a really important tool to protect. Looking at your controls, whether it's MFA and what other controls can you mature.
That on collaboration, I think that's one of the things that ASFA's really paused on as well. We've got this unique set of members across the whole sector, including MPMS, and so how do we actually make sure that works for the benefit of people to be able to react quickly, to react consistently, to make sure that we're sharing enough information that gets people up that control curve really quickly. And I think one of the things that will help us is our building of the SC3 framework. It's difficult to say if you're trying to do it in a hurry, but it's quite a comprehensive framework to be able to share information in a safe and secure way, keep the system safe, and it replicates the banking sector in all the ways that are good, as we've correctly identified, because they've got a different risk profile. They've been dealing with these sorts of attacks and the scale of them for such a long time. They've got a really good playbook. Super needs to adopt, parts of that, I think, fit it for our own use, but having us for being able to kind of be that front door entry there is probably best use of our broad membership. It's quite a thing to face into, but it's a good example of what an association does when it's working well, I think. Owen, I imagine you'd be looking for something like that and other solutions to help make sure that then any time we face this again, it's done pretty well, like smoothly in
Yeah,
response.
yeah, absolutely. I think there's absolutely a an opportunity to have that kind of process or middleware or however you want to address it in terms of how practitioners, whether they're in cyber or financial crime,
Yeah.
potentially can kind of share that leading threat metrics around what do I need to look out for, what's a control that works, and that might filter all the way down to how you manage your web application firewall,
Mm.
which is um, your front door security on your member online portal. So, do you have those things like bot and script protection? Are you managing rate limiting and things like that? So, if they're non-standard or non-human behavior time signatures trying to log in, well, then you've got something you need to handle. So, I
Mm.
definitely think there's an opportunity to share more broadly across the industry.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's trying to keep one step ahead of people who are hell bent on making sure we can't is a really interesting challenge. And that I did want to touch on MFA, multi-factor authentication, which most of us are quite used to now, I suppose. But there's a little bit about that risk profiling that we spoke about earlier, and that friction, and even controls like MFA that, I've got to say, I think it troubles me a little bit. I think we need to have certain basic processes in place and in place in the right ways across transactions or front door of the fund. But if you think about who's most at risk of having their money taken quickly, then it's those who are older because they've already met a condition of release. If they're not digital natives and we're moving really fast with technology, does that lessen their engagement? And that's a real balancing act, isn't it? But MPMS has got views on MFA and good practice in that area. Can you tell us about what you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the member population, at times are quite au fait with some of these control processes when we do roll them out, and maybe there's an idea that it's something completely new to them. But these technologies and these processes are used broadly across multiple industries, and they generally engage with them quite effectively. If I think about just fundamentally MFA and having an opt-out model, even at that point, is I think really effective. If it's opt-in, well, then the individual has to take the step to move it. Whereas if it's already deployed and they would have to opt out, well, then it's kind of security baked in, which I think is important, or potentially enforced, because you need to support your members to make good decisions around the security of their account, which helps them in the long term. So I definitely think that's very important. I think making sure that the MFA is aligned back to the account. Like a mobile is a very dominant data point for an individual. So making sure that they're registering off a mobile that's kind of native to the account, I think is really important. And then longer term, how do you kind of manage and monitor your MFA technology? So what does that look like if it flows into your security operations teams in information security? So you can really keep an eye on the flow and how it's being used. I think is really important for a well structured MFA approach.
But we're I think that's all great. Other thing that worries me is that everyone knows about MFA, including those who know how to get around it. So I think we've got to think next too, don't we? Can we jump? Can we jump technologies? Can we go somewhere else? What should we be doing?
Yeah, there's definitely some kind of opportunities for the superannuation sector to kind of move ahead into new technologies. I think some of the areas that we've been exploring and have piloted with funds more recently is things like EKYC with biometric verification. So you
I'm
understand
glad
that,
because we needed more acronyms in super, I think. So
yes.
that's great. Let's get some more in there.
So electronic know your customer. So there's a
Okay.
know your customer process when you're looking to access funds. There's an electronic process that you can go to where it takes the information from the ID and confirms it with the government, the document verification service. Whereas there's some new technology which is used across multiple different industries at the moment, whether it's telecoms, whether it's banks, whether it's insurance, where you engage with the member and look at their ID, but also match it to the how they present themselves on their smartphone. And it uses some really interesting technology to understand, are you dealing with the right individual? And if we think about where AI is moving with deep fakes, I
Yes.
think that's a really strong kind of future facing control.
Yes.
That
Good
could
creepy,
be
isn't it? It's creepy but good. Good creepy.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I think listen, data storage and how you manage that data after that point and data deletion is really important. But
Yes.
I do think it's a really strong control. Am I dealing with the correct individual member and are they requesting it? Or even if it's step up verification, you've already onboarded them, you know who they are, and then they come back for a transaction. Can you trigger a step up verification that might require biometric? Beyond that, I think the government are really looking at some interesting technology under their TEX, the Trust Exchange
Mm.
initiative, which starts to loop in verified credentials and digital IDs. And if we look at Europe and America, these processes have started to be rolled out through Apple, through Google, and Microsoft. Where a credential, a one-for-one tokenized solution, is embedded on your phone, and it's biometrically matched. And I think from a government perspective, what that starts to talk about is we're not sharing the details of our IDs to absolutely every organization. You start to match against the verified credentials, which is specific to you and is very difficult to hack. But it also stops us, creating potentially data honeypots across the industry. So I know we've at MPMS we've had a lot of conversations with government in respect to that solution, and I think it's future facing. But I think they are the things that we should really explore to provide better member outcomes.
Yeah, that's really exciting actually, because I'm very keen to not just sort of walk step by step in the technology, just one pace behind the bad people who know how the technology is working. We've got to pick up and leap over them, don't we? So I think that some of that biometric stuff sounds, and not creating a massive data pool sounds really interesting too.
Yeah.
I think the interesting crossover, and this always comes out inarticulately for me, which is not a great thing when you're running a podcast, but nonetheless, the interesting crossover for super is when you can see that data breaches might have happened from corporate Australia or might have happened from other areas, but they impact super. The owners of corporate Australia are often also the superannuation funds who this is now impacted. So there can be some form of industry sort of, we expect this, that is actually pushed through the responsible investment process as well. So owners of corporate Australia can start to expect and have conversations with the underlying operating companies about how they are actually seeing data philosophically, not gathering pools that could potentially be breached. And, I think there's a nice sort of virtuosity to a bit of that as well. So
Yeah, absolutely.
let's leave the trustees with some tips. Let's say you're sitting around a trustee board table or in a senior executive role. You're not necessarily a CISO, but you want to know what you need to know as you navigate this world of increased cyber threat. Got a couple of
Yep.
key tips for them?
Yeah, and again, taking into account the learnings from the recent kind of activity, I think robust risk assessment processes. If you're going digitally native, if you're looking at a channel to facilitate or support members in interacting with the fund, what risks come with that? So a really robust risk assessment spanning across, not only cyber, but financial crime and risk and compliance, so you can really understand the potential risks. I think pen testing is incredibly important, and checking the penetration testing on publicly facing portals, I think, is really important to understand what risks might eventuate. I think some of the penetration testing companies are becoming really adept at trying to find those gaps in your processes, and you can really help you have a secure kind of approach. And that kind of speaks to information security or financial crimes controls by design. So start from a strong base of controls and then build out into the product. I think looking at those opportunities to mature your technology, I think, is really important as well. So whether it's MFA, whether it's the next step beyond MFA, whether it's biometric matching and facial matching, liveness tests, I think there's a huge opportunity, and it's not just control and friction; it's also a supportive tool to allow for members to interact in a really digitally safe manner. And I think they're the kind of takeaways for me.
It's a good point. If we get that right, that becomes another point of engagement on the safety of their retirement savings, as opposed to something that they kind of see as onerous or have to do. And super has attracted some of the, I think, world's best, little biased, marketers and communications experts, because they're dealing in a compulsory product, and we're trying to get engagement from people who've got to think long term. Yeah, it's a really interesting challenge, but one that can probably put a positive spin on it. I think also I might add to your list, Owen, one of the things that ASFA would encourage trustees to look at the moment is the expectations of the regulator. And I think APRA have been quite clear in the letter they sent recently about what they expect of super funds to have in terms of controls on member portals and when. And so trustees will want to be making sure that their funds are on a path to compliance with that, and having good open conversations with the regulator in this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea of that maturity is certainly well understood by the regulators, and being more communicated out to say, this is the maturity level and the control processes that they want to see across the industry. And I think it's gives an opportunity for funds to respond and kind of roll those things out, which I think is good.
Well, terrific. It's been wonderful spending time with you today, Owen, on this matter. We've obviously been having a lot of conversations with our members on cyber resilience, and a very wise CEO sort of wrapped it up the other day where they said that one of the things that they learnt was that the technology component to this particular incident was but one small part of what they had to deal with. And I think that is a wonderful way of remembering that the tech and the resilience that's built into our technical solutions is really quite comprehensive and very contemporary. And that's why you're able to protect so much over time. But we've got a lot of coordination to do in the communication, in the way in which we can leap ahead in our tech, and that's the work yet to be done. It's really nice to hear from you today, Owen, and hear about what MPMS has been doing and how you saw that recent incident. It's great to have such great minds in super. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for listening to Voice of Super. Don't forget to subscribe to get the next episode. This has been just a fabulous topic to discuss. Remember, this is the superannuation podcast for people in super, by people in super, discussing all things super. Thanks, Owen.
Thanks, Mary. That was great. Thank you.